Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The moment Darlington stepped back into Cassandra's mansion, there was no applause, no warmth, no celebration. Just cold stares and a mocking smirk from the woman he had once promised to marry. 2 months had passed since Amaka vanished, without a trace. Darlington had exhausted every contact he had to find her, even resorting to hiring a private investigator discreetly. But it yielded nothing. His guilt weighed like chains around his neck, and his silence in front of Cassandra was both penance and protection. He told himself he was doing the right thing, marrying the woman everyone expected him to marry, preserving the legacy, safeguarding his name. But as he knelt before Cassandra in her private lounge and muttered the words, "I'm sorry," it felt like his soul was being traded. Cassandra, dressed in a silk robe and sipping imported wine, simply raised an eyebrow and said, "Took you long enough." Then she got up, walked past him, and called out, "The wedding is back on." Her voice echoed, but Darlington felt smaller than he ever had before. The wedding was elegant, opulent, and lifeless. Industry leaders, politicians, family friends, and social media influencers filled the grand hall. Cassandra dazzled in her luxury designer gown, yet the glow on her face wasn't love, it was triumph. Darlington wore the finest tuxedo money could buy, but it fit like a prison uniform. His eyes searched the crowd, hoping for some miraculous sighting of Amaka in the distance, some glimmer of hope that she hadn't given up on him. But she was gone. As vows were exchanged, his mind drifted to the quiet backyard of his mansion, where Amaka once danced barefoot in the rain. Her laughter, her simplicity, her refusal to accept his wealth, they haunted him. He repeated his vows like a man reading a contract he didn't write. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Cassandra leaned in, kissed him with a smug grin, and whispered into his ear, "Now behave." From the outside, their life was picture perfect. Lavish dinner parties, exotic vacations, paparazzi coverage. Cassandra made sure the world saw them as a power couple. But behind closed doors, Darlington was nothing more than her accessory. She humiliated him subtly in front of guests, interrupted him during meetings, and even regulated which of his staff he could interact with. There was no intimacy, no affection, just obligation. Darlington tried to endure it, convincing himself that perhaps she would soften with time. But her need for control only grew. One night, as she berated a maid for serving warm champagne, Darlington saw in her everything he feared: pride, cruelty, and an insatiable hunger for dominance. He went to bed that night without speaking a word. When he closed his eyes, he didn't dream of boardrooms or success. He dreamed of a dusty market in a quiet town where Amaka might be selling fruits, and their child, maybe his daughter, running barefoot beside her. That dream, though painful, was all that kept him alive. The mansion glittered, but for Darlington, it was just a shell. Cassandra had turned their home into a place of surveillance, where trust didn't exist. She installed security cameras in places that made no sense: the kitchen, the garage, the garden, even his private study. Every call he made, every step he took, felt watched. The staff had changed too. Most of the loyal workers he trusted were replaced by people loyal to her, ones who bowed more to her voice than his. It was clear now, Cassandra didn't want a husband. She wanted a puppet. Every time he tried to reclaim some form of independence, she would remind him coldly, "Everything you own, everything you built, is tied to my father's signature. Try me." Darlington found himself spending more and more time in silence, reading old journals, staring at Amaka's last picture on his phone, a hidden one he'd never deleted. He hated himself for being weak, for staying. But what was the alternative? Losing everything? In the quiet hours of dawn, when Cassandra was asleep or out partying with her clique, Darlington would make encrypted calls to a man named Keene, a former Army intelligence officer turned investigator. Keene didn't ask many questions. All he needed was the name Amaka, a vague description, and the promise of discretion. "If she's alive, I'll find her," Keene assured. It became Darlington's only hope. Every week, he received updates, blurry CCTV footage from towns, testimonies from strangers who claimed to have seen a young woman with a child, and even a false lead that led him to a refugee center in Calabar. Nothing was concrete, but he held on. When Cassandra asked why he was always up late, he lied. Stress from the board. She never pressed further, too caught up in her luxurious life and planning the next trip to Dubai. Little did she know that every time Darlington kissed her forehead, he was thinking of someone else. Someone who once kissed his hand just to thank him for giving her a job. By the end of the second year, Darlington had lost weight, his eyes had sunken, and the fire in him was almost out. He looked like a man defeated, not by failure, but by absence. The absence of true connection, of love, of purpose. Cassandra noticed the shift. One evening during a party at the mansion, she called him aside, squeezed his chin tightly, and whispered with a venomous smile, "If you're still looking for her, I swear I will make her regret ever stepping into our lives." Darlington smiled back coldly, leaned in closer, and said, "Maybe she already does. After all, she had a child with a coward." That night, as Cassandra stormed out in anger, Darlington knew he couldn't wait much longer. He had to find Amaka, or lose the last piece of himself forever. It was a warm Sunday morning when Darlington received the tip that would nearly end his last shred of privacy. Keene had discovered something unusual. A woman working as a cleaner in a remote hospital who bore a striking resemblance to Amaka. The child with her, according to local staff, looked mixed and unusually reserved. Darlington's heart beat wildly as he planned the trip. He told Cassandra he was traveling for a business inspection. She didn't question him. She never cared much about his business anymore unless it involved media coverage. Darlington traveled with only one bodyguard, someone he trusted from childhood, and slipped away quietly from the mansion at night. The journey to the town was long and dusty. By the time he arrived at the hospital, the woman was gone, quit just the week before. She said she had to run, the head nurse explained. She looked scared. Another dead end. But this time, Keene advised caution. Someone might be tipping her off, he warned. Back home, Cassandra had grown suspicious. One of her spies, a staff member planted in the mansion's security team, intercepted a strange phone call from Darlington to a private number labeled K. Cassandra waited until he was asleep one night and unlocked his phone using Face ID. She copied the number, recorded some messages, and called her father. The next day, Darlington was summoned to a board meeting. But it wasn't a meeting, it was a trap. Cassandra, her father, and their legal team presented screenshots, call logs, and messages. "You're funding a private operation behind our backs," her father barked. "Using company time and our resources to chase a maid," Cassandra added mockingly. "Or should I say baby mama?" Darlington stood there frozen. He had no words, just shame. From that moment, Cassandra took everything, his company shares, his financial cards, even his access to their joint properties. Darlington's face was removed from the company's website. Staff were instructed to direct all communications to Cassandra or her father. And Darlington? He became a ghost in the mansion. A man with nothing but regret, memories, and a love he had once tried to bury. But even stripped of everything, he couldn't stop. That night, lying on the cold couch in the study, he whispered to himself, "Even if I have to crawl, I'll find her." The day after the confrontation, Darlington stood by the balcony of what used to be his private lounge, now overtaken by Cassandra's designer clutter and cosmetics, staring into the sky like a man searching for answers in the clouds. There was no press conference, no formal announcement. Cassandra didn't need to go public. She knew where it would hurt most. In one day, all his bank cards were declined. His phone number was disconnected from every board group. Even his luxury cars, registered under the company's name, were seized by her father's legal team. Staff that once bowed respectfully began to avoid eye contact. His bedroom door was quietly reassigned to guests. Every corner of the mansion he built now screamed, "You are not welcome." But Darlington endured it, not because he was weak, but because he was waiting for one final sign, one small clue about Amaka's location. He told himself he could survive a little longer if there was even a 1% chance she and the child were out there, safe. Cassandra, emboldened by her control, now taunted him openly. You still think love is enough to rescue you, she sneered one night as she swirled red wine at dinner. You had everything. And you threw it away for a house girl. Darlington didn't respond. She chuckled, leaned forward, and added, the only reason I haven't buried you completely is because your name still helps mine shine. To the world, Cassandra was a brilliant CEO, philanthropist, and perfect wife. Behind closed doors, she was a tyrant cloaked in perfume and pearls. Darlington, once known for his charm and power, now sat quietly with wrinkled shirts, sunken eyes, and the stare of a man trapped. But even in his low estate, his heart refused to stop calling Amaka's name. One night, as he lay on the floor of the guest room where he now slept, he whispered to the ceiling, please, just let me see her one more time. Let me tell her I'm sorry. Let me see my child. Weeks passed in silence, until one Sunday afternoon at a local mall, everything changed. Darlington had gone alone. No security, no cameras, no Cassandra. Just a man buying medicine and browsing books to distract his mind. That's when he saw him, a small boy, maybe 5 years old, dark-skinned, curly-haired, wearing a tiny white shirt with cartoon drawings. But it wasn't the boy's face that stopped Darlington cold. It was the necklace around his neck. A tiny gold piece shaped like a sunflower. The exact one Darlington had custom-made for Amaka 2 years ago. Only one existed. His hands trembled. The boy held a woman's hand. Darlington followed cautiously, staying out of sight. Then the boy turned and called out, Mummy, and Darlington saw her, older, quieter, thinner, but unmistakably her. Amaka. His Amaka. And for the first time in 2 years, Darlington wept. Time stopped. The air around Darlington turned to static. He stood still behind a bookstore shelf, watching the scene unfold like a dream. Amaka picked up the child and kissed his forehead with the tenderness of a woman who had learned to survive through nothing but love. She looked different, older, perhaps even a little broken, but still beautiful, still elegant in her simplicity. She wore a plain brown gown and sandals, nothing like the extravagant fabrics Cassandra bathed in. But Darlington saw royalty. As they walked past him, his body refused to move. His lips quivered, but no sound came. He watched her disappear down the escalator, holding tightly to the child who wore his necklace. A part of him screamed to run after her, to yell her name, to fall to his knees right there. But fear, guilt, and disbelief anchored him. It can't be, that's my child, he whispered to himself. Slowly, as if in a trance, he followed them from a distance, heart pounding with each step. They exited the mall through the back parking lot. Darlington, desperate not to lose them again, picked up speed and approached quietly. He waited until they turned into a quiet corner beside a pharmacy, and then called out, Amaka. She froze. Her grip tightened on the boy's hand. Slowly, she turned, and their eyes met for the first time in over 2 years. 1,000 emotions danced between them. Shock, fear, anger, longing. Darlington took a step forward, trembling. It's really you, he said, barely able to breathe. But Amaka shook her head. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was firm, protective. You can't be seen with us. Please just go. She turned quickly and tried to walk away, but Darlington stepped in front of her. Amaka, please. I need to talk to you. Just give me 1 minute. 1 minute. She looked down at the boy, then at him, her eyes already swelling with tears. You don't understand what you're doing, she whispered. You're putting us in danger. That night, back at her small rented apartment in a dusty part of the city, Amaka sat alone in the kitchen after putting her son to sleep. She stared at the necklace in her hand, her mind spinning. Darlington had begged for a meeting, and against her better judgment, she had agreed to meet him privately the next day. She knew what he wanted, answers. But she had spent 2 years building a fragile world of safety, one she wasn't ready to risk again. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. I warned you. Stay hidden or die. Next time, your son won't wake up. Amaka dropped the phone and gasped. Her knees buckled, and she slumped to the floor, sobbing. Outside in the darkness, someone watched her window. The past she thought she outran was catching up again. They met in a small cafe on the edge of town. It was dusty, quiet, and far from anything Cassandra's people would frequent. Amaka wore a long scarf that partly concealed her face. Darlington came in with a hoodie, anxious and nervous, like a teenager. Their eyes met, and for a long while neither said a word. The silence between them was louder than the clinking cups around them. Amaka's fingers trembled as she clutched her cup of tea. "You found us," she said. Darlington nodded slowly. "It took me 2 years." She looked up, eyes wide with pain. "You should have stopped. They told me you would." He leaned forward, desperate. "Amaka, I thought you left because of me, because I hurt you." She blinked hard, tears forming. "You did hurt me, Darlington. But that wasn't why I left." She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. "Look." Darlington picked up the phone and began scrolling through messages, photos, and voice notes. There were anonymous threats, photos taken from a distance, recordings of a woman warning Amaka to disappear or die. One video stood out. A blurry image of a woman in heels and a black veil, unmistakably Cassandra, meeting a man in a dark alley. "She paid them," Amaka whispered. "She hired people to watch me, to threaten my mother, to trail me. I ran not because I was weak. I ran because I was carrying your child." Darlington closed his eyes, overwhelmed. "He's mine." She nodded. "You have a daughter, Darlington. Her name is Amina. She's 5. His hand covered his face as sobs escaped him. All the lost moments, the milestones, the birthdays, stolen by fear and pride. He reached out and took Amaka's hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But she pulled back. "Don't say that now. It's too late. I live every day watching shadows. If you truly care about me, leave before they kill us both." Darlington left the cafe that day with his world spinning. But he had made a choice. He would no longer be the man who watched from balconies, no longer be the man who bowed to threats. He would uncover the full truth. He would protect his daughter. He would reclaim the pieces of himself Cassandra had stolen. And if it cost him everything, so be it. Because some hearts were never meant to die, and his, though bruised and buried, had just started beating again. Amaka arrived at the next meeting visibly shaken, but she carried something in her eyes Darlington had never seen before, not fear, but exhaustion born of fighting too long. They met in a hidden room, behind an abandoned bookstore recommended by the agent Darlington once hired. There was no tea this time, no warm greetings, just raw silence between two people whose love had been drowned in threats and betrayals. Amaka began slowly, placing several printed photos and voice records on the old wooden table. "You asked for the truth," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Here it is." Darlington picked up one of the photos. It was Amaka crying outside a clinic, visibly pregnant. Another showed her mother being pushed into a taxi, terror in her eyes. The final photo was a screen capture of a money transfer from one of Cassandra's dummy accounts to a known thug in Lagos. The recipient note simply read, "Make her disappear quietly." Darlington couldn't breathe. The weight of it all collapsed on him like bricks from a crumbling wall. He had suspected Cassandra was capable of jealousy, maybe even manipulation, but this? Threats, surveillance, life-endangering schemes? It shattered whatever illusion remained of the woman he had married. He stared blankly at a voice note as it played, Cassandra's unmistakable voice coldly saying, "I don't care if she bleeds out. She will not embarrass me. If you don't scare her, I'll do it myself." Amaka's hands trembled as she added, "They poisoned my water once. I lost the baby for 3 days. I thought she was dead inside me." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She had cried enough. "And every time I tried to leave town, someone would find me. That's when I realized they were tracking my phone. I smashed it, left everything behind, and disappeared to the village. My aunt hid me in a goat shed for days before I escaped." Darlington sank to his knees, eyes red. "My God, all this because of me?" He asked one final question, voice shaking. "Are you absolutely sure she's mine?" Amaka didn't flinch. "There's no one else. I was already pregnant the week you told me you were going through with the engagement. I left not because I hated you, but because I couldn't bring up our child in the shadow of a woman who'd kill to keep her pride intact." That moment broke Darlington. He knew now that this wasn't just about betrayal or lost love. This was about life itself. He had a daughter, a living, breathing child who bore his name, his eyes, and his stolen legacy. And he had missed it all. He stood, slowly, looking at Amaka like a man who had just survived a fatal crash. "I will fix this. I swear on my life." But Amaka shook her head. "It's not about fixing anymore. It's about surviving. If you truly want to help us, disappear. Because the woman you married won't let us live if she knows you found us." The past came rushing back in the form of memory, so sharp it cut through Darlington like a blade. He remembered the night it all began, the night Amaka danced in the mansion's garden under the moonlight, unaware he was watching. He had returned early from a business trip, frustrated and angry, and stumbled upon her. Something about her joy, her innocence, had healed a crack inside him. That night, for the first time, he felt human again. Over the next few days, conversations turned into laughter, laughter into shared confessions, and eventually a kiss, then the night they couldn't take back. They slept together in the guest room during a stormy evening, far away from the noise of the world. He had promised himself it was just a moment, a mistake even, but his heart knew better. When Cassandra arrived 2 days later to announce their engagement was going public, Amaka had vanished. He thought she left out of heartbreak. He had no idea what storm was coming. Unbeknownst to him, one of the junior staff, a cook loyal to Cassandra's mother, had seen Amaka leaving Darlington's room. Within hours, the information reached Cassandra. She said nothing initially. Instead, she stayed to small dinner with the staff and invited Amaka to serve at the table. That night, Cassandra pulled her into the pantry and whispered her threats directly. "If you want to live long enough to see your baby, you'll disappear without a word." Amaka was already a week late on her period. The world around her collapsed. She begged Cassandra, said she didn't even know yet if she was pregnant, but Cassandra laughed. "I don't care. Whether it's real or imagined, you're already poison in this house." She then gave her a small black phone and told her, "You'll receive instructions. Leave when it rings. If you don't, you'll regret ever stepping foot into this mansion." That night, Amaka packed what little she had, stole away through the back gate, and never looked back. Back in the present, Darlington sat in his car with shaking hands. The memory tormented him. "I should have known," he muttered. "I should have fought harder." But he had been a coward, letting the world choose for him, letting Cassandra's family dictate his moves. He had been groomed for power, for wealth, not for love or bravery. And now he realized the true cost. His daughter had grown up calling another man uncle, not knowing her father had traded her safety for company shares and board seats. The man in the mirror was not the billionaire anymore. He was the beggar, not of money, but of forgiveness. And deep down, he knew redemption wouldn't come cheap. It would cost him the only thing he had left, everything. The DNA test results arrived in an unmarked envelope. Darlington sat on the edge of his hotel bed, far from his mansion, far from a luxury, and opened it with trembling fingers. The words stared at him, simple but life-changing. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. The page dropped from his hands. He wept, not because he doubted her, but because the evidence made it real. A daughter, Amina, his, flesh and blood. He had missed her first steps, her first words, her first tears. Cassandra stole it from him, and he had let her. For what? A company? A name? A lifestyle wrapped in chains? He rose, pacing the room like a lion caught in a trap. His father had once told him, the true measure of a man is what he does after the fall. Darlington had fallen, hard. But now something was rising in him, not ego, not revenge, but something older, deeper. Fatherhood. He began to replay every moment with Cassandra under a different light. Her coldness, her possessiveness, her obsession with public image. They were more than just pride. They were a disease, and he had caught it by proximity. He recalled her telling him, "You are only valuable when you behave." Like a pet. And now he saw what Amaka meant when she said it wasn't about fixing. It was about surviving. But he would not let his daughter live in hiding. He would not let her believe her father was weak. He would protect her, no matter the cost. As night fell, Darlington made a list. People he trusted, assets still under his control, names that could help him vanish cleanly. Because the war was about to begin. And he was no longer fighting for love alone. He was fighting for his child's right to exist without fear. Before he left the room, he stood in front of the mirror one last time. The man who stared back was not the billionaire of magazines. He was not Cassandra's husband. He was a father, and fathers don't beg for permission to love their children. Cassandra will pay for this, he said, his voice cold. Not with blood, but with truth. Then he tucked the DNA report into his coat pocket and walked into the night. What came next would change everything. Darlington didn't wait to set up a meeting. He stormed straight into Cassandra's family estate. The same place where his engagement had been celebrated years ago. The same cold halls where he was once praised as the future son-in-law of Nigeria's richest family. Now he wasn't greeted. He wasn't offered a seat. No guards moved to block his path, but the tension that hung in the air was thicker than ever before. Cassandra was seated in her private lounge, sipping wine, dressed in red like the warning she had always been. Her father sat beside her, speaking quietly into his phone until Darlington's presence silenced the room. Without a greeting, without pretense, Darlington threw a thick envelope onto the glass table between them. The DNA results, photos, screenshots, recordings. Cassandra barely blinked. "You've been busy," she said coolly, eyes narrowing. "Looking for something you were told to forget." He pointed at her, his hands shaking not from fear, but fury. "You threatened her life, Cassandra. You sent thugs. You paid people to poison her. You tracked her. You nearly killed my daughter before she was even born." The silence that followed cracked like thunder. Cassandra's father cleared his throat, trying to interject. But Darlington didn't let up. "You told me you loved me, yet you tried to erase my bloodline just to protect your stupid pride. You didn't just destroy my life, you stole my chance to be a father." Cassandra stood now, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the drama. "I did what I had to do," she replied with venom. "You slept with a maid. A maid, Darlington. Do you know what kind of disgrace that would have brought upon our families? Do you think I would let some low-class girl ruin what generations of legacy built?" She leaned closer, whispering now, "I saved you from public ruin, and this is how you repay me." Darlington laughed bitterly. "Saved me? No, Cassandra. You enslaved me. You married me with lies and threats. You used my weakness to build your image, and you nearly killed an innocent woman and her unborn child in the process." Cassandra's face didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but the irritation of someone whose control had been challenged. "And what will you do now?" she asked. "Ruin your name by telling the world you have a child with a woman who once cleaned your floors? Good luck rebuilding anything from that." She walked toward the door, turned, and added with a smirk, "You'll have nothing left, Darlington. Not your company, not your respect, and definitely not me." He stood still for a long moment before answering, his voice calm and dangerous. "You're right. I won't have you, but I'll have peace. And that's something you've never known." Then he walked out, leaving everything behind but the truth, and the fire that now burned in him to reclaim what mattered. The fallout from the confrontation was swift and brutal. By morning, Cassandra's father had convened an emergency board meeting of the conglomerate that bore Darlington's family name. In less than 2 hours, they voted unanimously to freeze all of Darlington's shares, citing mental instability and erratic behavior. Cassandra had already leaked a short clip of Darlington yelling in the estate, strategically edited to make him seem unhinged. News blogs picked it up instantly. Is Darlington Okoye losing it? Within days, he was a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. His email was flooded with media inquiries, his calls stopped coming, and even friends he'd grown up with began distancing themselves, unsure of what side of a war they were supposed to be on. But the man at the center of it all remained oddly calm. He knew the cost of war, and he had chosen this battlefield himself. The lies Cassandra had built would crumble, even if they took everything down with them. Darlington spent nights alone in a small apartment he'd rented under a fake name. The man who once walked marble halls now ate instant noodles and scribbled down names of the few assets still under his full control. A land deed in Edo. A vintage car not tied to any company. An offshore account in Ghana his father had set up long ago, forgotten in the web of family business. It wasn't much, but it was something. He made the decision quietly. He would liquidate everything still legally his and walk away from the empire. There would be no press conference, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet surrender to the life he now chose. He wrote a letter, not to Cassandra, not to her father, but to his own mother. In it, he apologized for the disgrace and promised her that though he had failed them in the eyes of the world, he had chosen to stand for something real at last. Before dawn, he walked through the mansion he once called home for the final time. The place felt unfamiliar now, like a museum filled with memories of a man he no longer recognized. He left no note, no trace of his departure, just the quiet echo of shoes on imported marble floors, and a locked door behind him. On his way out, he paused at the grand mirror in the hallway, the one Cassandra had once used for selfies and fake smiles. This time, he didn't look into it. He simply walked past, never turning back. The Darlington Okoye the world knew was gone. In his place stood a man stripped of everything but truth, and the fire to reclaim his life not with power, but with purpose. The sky was gray that morning, as though the world itself understood the weight of what Darlington was doing. He took a long, winding drive to visit his family, not to make amends, but to say farewell. His mother, seated quietly in their old estate's garden, seemed to know before he even spoke. Her eyes softened, and she simply opened her arms. He held her like a son again, burying his face in her shoulder. "I'm leaving," he finally whispered. "I don't know for how long, but I'm not coming back to that life." She didn't ask where. She didn't ask why. She just placed her hand on his chest and said, "Then go with your whole heart. This time, don't let fear make your choices." Darlington left a sealed envelope behind, the letter, the DNA result, the full truth, in case anyone ever asked about his disappearance. He didn't want sympathy. He only wanted peace. He left behind the car, the watch, even his phone. By evening, he stood on the edge of a dirt road miles away from a city, his shoes caked in dust. The only thing he carried was a small bag and the worn photo of his daughter that Amaka had given him. It was the first picture he'd ever seen of her. She was smiling wide, gap-toothed, missing one shoe, but radiant. That picture was more valuable than all his assets combined. It was proof that he still had something left worth living for. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, he boarded a rundown bus heading west. No bodyguards. No GPS. Just a man and a mission. Somewhere out there, his child was sleeping under a roof that trembled with every wind. And he would be the man to make sure she never had to live in fear again. He arrived in the small town 3 days later, disguised and exhausted. The air smelled like firewood and rain. Locals didn't recognize him, and that was exactly what he wanted. He found a corner shop, bought a new phone under a different name, and finally made the call. Amaka picked up on the second ring. "It's me," he said, voice rough with emotion. There was silence on the other end. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he continued. "I just want you to know. I'm here now. For real. I've left it all behind." The silence lingered longer this time, and then a whisper, "Where are you?" That night, under a different roof, Darlington Okoye slept peacefully for the first time in years. No headlines, no lies, no luxury. Just hope, flickering faintly like the candle beside his bed. The house where Amaka lived wasn't anything like the marble halls Darlington once knew. It sat on the edge of a sleepy town where the air smelt of earth after rainfall, and the night brought a silence too heavy for words. He arrived there with dust on his shoes and sweat on his neck, but he didn't care. He'd spent the past 2 years imprisoned by wealth, tormented by pride, and now, stripped of power and possessions, he felt free for the first time. Amaka opened the door with hesitant eyes, holding her daughter behind her like a shield. She stared at Darlington as if seeing a ghost, unsure whether to slam the door or cry. But when their daughter peeked from behind her and said, "That's the man from the mall," everything shifted. Amaka let him in slowly, one breath at a time, her guard still wrapped tightly around her. The inside of her home was modest, barely furnished, but warm in spirit. Darlington stepped in like a man walking into a sacred shrine, removing his shoes not out of culture, but out of deep respect. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the ticking of a cheap wall clock and the occasional laughter of their daughter from another room. Darlington didn't beg. He didn't try to explain what had already destroyed her. He simply said, "I'm sorry. For all of it." Amaka looked at him, her eyes full of wounds that no apology could heal. "I carried that child in fear," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "I gave birth alone. I lived every day thinking you chose her, thinking I wasn't enough to fight for." Darlington bowed his head. "I was a coward," he replied. "But I'm here now, with nothing but the truth." Amaka didn't cry. She had run out of tears long ago. Instead, she asked, "What do you want?" He hesitated before answering. "I want to build from the ground up. Not with money, but with you. With our child. I want to be a man she can call father, not a stranger in a suit." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a plea. It was a man offering his last ounce of dignity. And for the first time since he arrived, Amaka let her breath escape her chest in a soft sigh. That night, Darlington slept on a mat on the floor of her living room. The fan barely worked. The window was cracked. But he slept like a man who had finally come home. Amaka, meanwhile, watched him from her small bed, her heart battling between self-preservation and a hope she thought she buried. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who danced barefoot in the kitchen until he walked in and changed everything. Could she trust him again? Could she risk her peace for a man who once chose power over love? The answers didn't come that night, but one thing was certain. Something had shifted. The man who left a mansion had walked into a place of forgotten shelter and asked not to rule it, but to serve in it. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth something. Cassandra didn't take Darlington's disappearance lightly. She called it a betrayal. She called it madness. But in the privacy of her marble office, it was humiliation that burned deepest. The media hadn't picked up his disappearance yet, but she knew it wouldn't be long before questions began surfacing, especially when it became clear he had severed every known tie to his former life. Her pride, already wounded from his refusal to grovel like a proper trophy husband, twisted into vengeance. She ordered her legal team to begin a smear campaign, subtle at first. Articles citing Darlington's emotional instability. Whispered rumors that he was seeking mental help abroad. Leaked emails taken out of context, painting him as erratic and dangerous. Soon, blogs began picking up the story, from boardroom to breakdown. What happened to Darlington Okoye? But she didn't stop there. In the shadows, she reignited the threats. Anonymous messages, once sent to Amaka, began flooding again. Only this time, they were more calculated, more sinister. Amaka received the first message a week after Darlington arrived. "You thought hiding would save you," the text read. "Your daughter is next." She didn't scream. She didn't even call the police. She simply stared at the screen and walked into the room, where Darlington was fixing a broken chair leg. She handed him the phone without a word. His jaw tightened. "She knows," he said. "We've been tracked." He immediately burned the SIM card and moved their daughter to a neighbor's house for the night. The next morning, he bought a second-hand laptop and began preparing new identities, fake documents, alternate names, a relocation plan. But Amaka stopped him. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice trembling. "This will never end unless we face it." Darlington looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the woman he loved, but the mother who had protected their child while he lived in luxury. "Then we fight," he said. "Not with guns, with truth." He collected every recording, every document, every thread of evidence he had, including the DNA test, the threats, and most importantly, the confrontation he secretly recorded with Cassandra. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. He began preparing to leak the entire story anonymously, not to the media, but to trusted figures who still had integrity. A retired judge who once mentored his father, a journalist who had once exposed a senator's sex scandal, and a former friend who now ran a powerful blog focused on corporate corruption. They would release everything together. The world had forgotten Amaka, but Darlington would make sure the world remembered what Cassandra did to silence her. For the first time, he was ready to use the weapon he once avoided, the truth. And in the quiet corners of a broken town, vengeance began to echo, not in rage, but in resolve. They moved to a quiet rural village with no banks, no newspapers, and no camera phones. Just thick trees, muddy roads, and hearts that had learned to live without noise. There, in a two-room bungalow with cracked walls and a tin roof, Darlington and Amaka began building a new life. He learned carpentry from an old man who used to make coffins, but now crafted chairs for the local market. Darlington worked with his hands for the first time in years, not to earn status, but to provide meals. His fingers bled, his back ached, but every splinter reminded him that he was alive. Amaka taught at a small school down the road, where desks were made of planks and chalk dust filled the air. The children adored her. Their daughter, now almost 4, walked to class each morning with a backpack too big for her tiny shoulders, calling Darlington Daddy, without hesitation. That one word healed wounds deeper than any scar. Life was hard, but it was honest. They ate meals from a single pot, shared duties, and laughed over broken lanterns. There was no Wi-Fi, no designer clothes, no imported wines. But there was peace. At night, Amaka and Darlington would sit outside beneath the stars, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just sitting in silence. They talked about what they lost, but more about what they found. A truth deeper than titles, a love stripped of performance. "Do you miss it?" Amaka asked one evening. "The power, the fame?" Darlington shook his head. "I miss not knowing how fake it all was." She rested her head on his shoulder, and for a moment, they weren't fugitives of a broken past. They were a family trying to grow something pure in soil that once buried them. Still, the past was never far. Occasionally, they'd hear a radio in the market mention Darlington's name, always in scandalous tones. Former CEO missing. Mental health questioned. Allegations of misconduct. But they didn't flinch anymore. What mattered wasn't what the world believed. It was the truth they lived. Their daughter began drawing pictures of their home, stick figures holding hands, a small house, a son that always smiled. One day, she drew 3 figures under a tree and wrote "My Family" with backward letters. Darlington stared at it for hours. He didn't need a mansion or a company. He didn't need the applause. All he needed was under that crooked roof, drawing love with crayons on torn paper. For the first time in his life, Darlington Okoye, once a billionaire, now a man of dust and dreams, felt like he finally belonged somewhere. And that somewhere was right beside Amaka. It was an ordinary morning when Darlington found the letter. He had just returned from the nearby market, a bag of gari and smoked fish hanging from one hand, when the village courier waved him down. The letter was crumpled and looked aged, as though it had taken a long and uncertain journey. There was no return address, just his full name scribbled in a shaky hand. He opened it cautiously, eyes scanning the weathered paper until he reached the first sentence. "You need to know the truth about what Cassandra did during the pregnancy." It was signed only with the name Uche, one of the domestic workers from his former mansion, a quiet kitchen assistant who had always kept to herself. In the letter, Uche described the events that occurred shortly after Amaka left, confirming that Cassandra had not only threatened Amaka's life, but had once mixed something into her tea, a miscarriage blend ordered from a local herbalist. She claimed Cassandra was too scared to actually kill Amaka, but wanted her weakened enough to scare her away permanently. Uche said she kept quiet out of fear, but could no longer bear the guilt. Darlington's hands trembled as he read the rest. Uche explained how she found the discarded herbs and heard Cassandra's heated calls with a woman who handled cleanup jobs. She'd been terrified then, but now, after losing her brother to gang violence, she had decided she wouldn't stay silent anymore. The pain of what Cassandra had done, not just to Amaka, but to an unborn child, had haunted her. She concluded the letter by apologizing for not coming forward sooner and wished Darlington and Amaka peace. The letter crushed him. It was one thing to know that Amaka was threatened, but to read in detail how close Cassandra had come to poisoning the woman he loved, and their child shattered whatever pieces of restraint still held Darlington together. He walked back into the house like a man whose lungs had collapsed. Amaka noticed instantly and took the letter from his hand. She sat, read silently, then folded it and placed it on the table, her eyes dark with a pain she had tried so hard to bury. "I always suspected," Amaka whispered, voice trembling. But seeing it in writing, knowing how far she went, her shoulders quaked, and Darlington knelt beside her, holding her as if shielding her from a past that had already happened. That night, the silence in their home was heavier than any they'd known. Neither spoke much. Their daughter, sensing the tension, clung to her father with questions in her eyes he couldn't answer. Later, Darlington sat alone outside, the letter on his lap and the weight of it all pressing against his chest. He had once built skyscrapers, negotiated with foreign investors, and hosted galas, but now he felt powerless against a truth so cruel it turned the air to ash. Still, he knew one thing: this wasn't over. Cassandra's secrets had lived in the dark too long. Whether or not he ever regained his fortune, Darlington would no longer stay silent. He had protected Cassandra's image for years. Now he would protect the truth. The day after they read the letter, Amaka began packing. She folded her clothes neatly into an old travel bag, helped their daughter into her slippers, and said nothing to Darlington until he asked, "Where are you going?" Her voice was even, but heavy. "I don't feel safe anymore. I thought hiding was enough. I thought distance would save us. But it's clear she'll never stop." Darlington stood still for a moment before walking over to the bag and zipping it shut. "You're right," he said quietly. "But you're not leaving alone. If we go together. If we stay together." Amaka looked at him, her face strained with years of exhaustion. "You don't have to do this. You've lost everything already." He smiled, that tired kind of smile that comes after surviving a storm. "Not everything. Not you." And that moment, that raw, honest exchange, was what finally broke her walls. She sank into his arms and cried like she hadn't cried in years. A few days later, Darlington took her to a quiet grove outside the village, where the air was cool and the trees rustled with gentle authority. Under the large shade of an udala tree, he dropped to one knee. No ring, no cameras, no fanfare. Just him and her, and a daughter playing nearby, who carried their whole future in her smile. "Amaka," he began, voice shaking. "I never got it right. Not at the start. Not even in the middle. But I want to spend the rest of my life getting it right. For you, for her, for us." Amaka was stunned. She blinked hard, then looked away, then looked back again. "What will we have?" she asked. "We have no name, no wealth, just broken pieces." Darlington stood and took her hands. "Then let's build with broken pieces. Let's make something honest." She stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." And for the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were starting. That night, their daughter slept peacefully while Darlington and Amaka sat outside, whispering about the future. He spoke of building furniture for trade. She talked about teaching women in the village to read and write. They didn't speak about revenge or fear, just love, healing, and small hopes that now felt like miracles. The past still hurt, yes, but the wounds had begun to scab. They knew trouble could return, but for now, they had each other. And in the stillness of a rural night, under stars that didn't judge or gossip, Amaka rested her head on Darlington's shoulder and breathed in the kind of peace that money couldn't buy. No headlines, no threats, no gold-plated cages, just love stripped bare, and for once enough. The peace didn't last long. It began with the smell, burning wood and oil, sharp and urgent. Amaka woke first, grabbing their daughter and rushing to the door. Outside, the small workshop Darlington had spent months building with his own hands was in flames. Villagers scrambled with buckets of water, but the fire had been set with purpose. It devoured the wood, the tools, the savings tucked away in the corner. Darlington stood frozen for a moment, watching the collapse of yet another dream. Then something darker settled over him. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He just walked into the smoke with a look in his eyes Amaka had never seen before, not even when he was a billionaire. This was not the grief of a man who lost possessions. It was the rage of a man who had lost too much for too long. When the fire finally died out, only ashes and blackened nails remained. But Darlington didn't mourn. He made a decision. Later that day he told Amaka, "It's time." She knew what he meant. He wasn't running anymore. The threats hadn't stopped them, and the fire wouldn't either. Darlington pulled out the laptop, reconnected with the journalist, the retired judge, and the blog whistleblower. The package was ready: videos, documents, recordings, and Uche's letter. Everything would be released in one synchronized strike. Cassandra would finally be exposed. No more games. No more image control. He used an internet cafe far from their village to upload everything through a VPN, carefully timed, untraceable. By the time they returned home, the internet had begun to buzz. Corporate heiress accused of blackmail and attempted poisoning. Inside the Darlington Amaka scandal, the truth finally emerges. The evidence was undeniable. Cassandra's voice in the recordings, the threats, the cover-ups, and most damning of all, the DNA test proving the child she tried to erase was Darlington's flesh and blood. In the days that followed, Cassandra's world began to crack. Her father's company stock dipped. Her social accounts were flooded with backlash. Investors pulled out. The media, once paid off, turned on her with glee. But in the village, Darlington and Amaka didn't celebrate. Their shop was gone. Their names were still tainted. They had nothing except each other. Still, Darlington had one final card to play. A friend from the past offered a legal route to reclaim some of his seized personal holdings. Not for wealth, but for justice. "Do it," Amaka said. "Not to fight her. To free yourself." That night, as the stars returned above their tin roof, they didn't talk about fire or pain. They talked about rebuilding. Again. Because some hearts, no matter how many times they burn, refuse to die. The world watched in shock as Cassandra's empire began to crumble. The evidence Darlington released spread like wildfire, leaping across gossip blogs, news stations, and private investor forums. The once celebrated heiress, whose wedding had graced magazine covers, was now the face of deception. Her father's corporation, already struggling in silence, suffered massive pullouts. International partners withdrew. Board members resigned. And while Cassandra still strutted in diamonds and designer gowns, her eyes betrayed panic. She called emergency press meetings, hired PR firms, and begged legal teams to scrub the internet. But it was too late. Uche's letter was published by a respected journalist. Screenshots of Darlington's hidden camera confrontation went viral. The audio clip of Cassandra threatening to erase that Maid and her child was all the public needed to drag her reputation into the mud. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore, not even her powerful father, who released a cold, short statement. "The board and I have no ties with the personal decisions of my daughter." Darlington, though, was not basking in any form of revenge. His phone rang endlessly, old friends, reporters, opportunists, but he answered none. He watched the unraveling of Cassandra's power from a small phone in a borrowed room. Every time he glanced at the headlines, he remembered what it cost him. Years of silence, betrayal, humiliation, and most of all, time lost with his daughter. He didn't celebrate her downfall. In fact, when Amaka showed him a video of Cassandra walking out of a courthouse, swarmed by press, looking like a pale shadow of her former self, he simply shook his head. "I loved her once," he muttered. "Not the woman she is, but the dream I thought she was." Amaka understood. Pain makes people see illusions. Sometimes you fall in love with what a person looks like in your future, not who they truly are in your present. Cassandra had never really been Darlington's piece, only a golden cage dressed in silk and pride. What hurt the most was that he had ignored the one who truly loved him for so long. But public disgrace didn't mean public justice. Cassandra wasn't in jail. She still had lawyers. She still had money. What she lost was her power to control him. The narrative had changed. And that gave Darlington something he hadn't had in a long time: freedom. Slowly, he used the legal connection his friend offered to retrieve a few assets in his name: a small plot of land, some royalties from past deals, and rights to an old business patent. Not riches, but enough to build. More importantly, it proved that he had a name again. Not the billionaire prince of parties and interviews, but a man with a future, no longer hunted by lies. Amaka stayed beside him every step, watching as Darlington finally stood on his own, not with luxury, but with truth. The reckoning had come. And now, after the fire, the loss, the betrayal, and the exile, Darlington began to rebuild, not for revenge, but for legacy. The sky was pale gold that morning, the kind of morning that didn't promise wealth, but peace. In the middle of a quiet field behind their new two-room apartment, Darlington laughed as his daughter ran in circles, pretending to be a princess warrior. Her curls bounced as she waved a stick-turned scepter, her smile brighter than the sun. Amaka leaned on the doorway, her dress fluttering, arms folded and eyes soft. She hadn't said much since the last court ruling gave Darlington ownership of that small property on the hill. But today, her silence was peaceful. She was watching a man who had once been broken by love, by greed, by pride, become whole again, not by power, but by choice. Darlington picked up their daughter and spun her in the air, planting kisses on her cheeks as she giggled uncontrollably. It wasn't the life Amaka ever imagined. No chandeliers, no marble kitchens, no red carpets. But in that moment, it was more real than anything she'd ever known. Darlington sat on the grass with his daughter in his lap and looked over at Amaka. He remembered the first time he saw her dancing, full of joy, barefoot in his mansion kitchen. That girl, that moment, changed everything. And now here she was, not as a maid, not as a hidden shame, but as his woman, his strength. "You know," he said as Amaka approached him, "I used to think having everything meant never losing. But maybe losing everything was the only way to have what really matters." Amaka smiled and sat beside him, her fingers brushing his. "You didn't lose everything," she whispered. "You lost what was fake. You found what was true." Their daughter ran off chasing butterflies, giving them a moment of quiet. Darlington leaned his head on Amaka's shoulder, eyes closed. His heart, once shattered by guilt, pressure, and silence, now beat steadily, slow and steady like the path they were walking. He still had wounds. So did she. But the heart that refused to die had finally found rest. But even peace has shadows. That evening, while the family gathered for a small meal under candlelight, far from the noise of the city, a message pinged on Darlington's phone. A restricted number, one line. "This isn't over." He stared at it for a long time before deleting it. He didn't tell Amaka. Not yet. Some ghosts don't stay buried. Somewhere in Lagos, Cassandra sat alone in a dark penthouse, her hands trembling over her wine glass, eyes fixed on a photo of Darlington's daughter that someone had anonymously sent to her. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She whispered, "You took my crown. I'll take your peace." The story wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.